the early 1980s, Star Wars had taken the world by storm.
You're all right! You did great!
Not once, not twice, but 3 times.
Be like what? Like we're being watched.
From the biggest box office figures to the smallest collectible figures, Star Wars was a phenomenon.
Star Wars changed a generation.
But Star Wars hadn't only changed a generation, it had also changed its creator.
He had been burned out. He had done so much with Star Wars.
The world's best-loved movie franchise had grown into an empire. But like the famous chicken walker, the man who built it had been brought to his knees.
The chicken walker was a full-scale model. I said to George, would you like to have this at the ranch? He said, yeah. So I went to the art director and I said, take it apart carefully. We're going to reinstall it at the ranch.
But this was anything but a careful dismantling, because when it arrived,
the man who was building out the ranch at the time said it's been hacked up by blowtorches and we can't put it back together.
for George, it seemed that Camelot had crumbled into literal pieces of a chicken walker. And to make sure this analogy isn't lost on anyone,
he said, we'll bury it somewhere at the ranch. Only the head construction guy at that time knows exactly where it is.
for George Lucas, Star Wars had been laid to rest, and he was mourning more than just the end of his space opera trilogy. For cast, crew, and fans alike, The Return of the Jedi marked the end of an era.
The last of the Jedi will you be?
But for George Lucas, it signaled the end of a 10-year endeavor that had consumed his life and didn't help his marriage. The next chapter for him would be one of recovery, both emotional and financial.
When I left, we had investment accounts. Divorce in California is a 50-50 divorce. So we split that personal money. When it came to the business, I said I would take a small percentage of Lucasfilm.
Own your own business.
And George said, no. I said, Lucasfilm will be yours.
George had turned his back on Marcia and Star Wars.
The last gasps of Star Wars were these TV movies.
I wish we had furry creatures like you where I came from.
Furries?
We had 2 Saturday morning animated series. Say you were like me, you watched Star Wars when you were 7, and Return of the Jedi comes out and you're 13 or 14, and then it's like, what next? Well, the things you want at that age as you become 16, 17, 18 years old, they're not going to be, satisfied by the Ewoks cartoon, right? They're just not.
The droids and Ewok shows come and go very rapidly. By the time you get to 1987, Star Wars has kind of faded from the public consciousness.
This was an era of emptiness, serious enough to have its own name.
There was literally nothing to cling on to, and a lot of the fans actually today call that the dark times. And even when I would talk with George Lucas and ask him if he was thinking about starting some new Star Wars films, he was always very evasive and he'd say, well, I plan on getting to it, but I'm not doing it right now.
What George was interested in getting around to at this point was pushing the state of the art for visual effects.
George always had it in the back of his mind that he wanted to make another Star Wars trilogy, but he didn't want to make it with the same practical effects that he did with the original films. He felt like he had taken that technology as far as he could at that point.
George would talk about technology that simply didn't exist, like the word digital.
And when it came to digital visual effects, Lucas's own industrial light and magic was pushing the pixelated envelope.
Lucas created ILM to work on his own films, but he opened the door to other filmmakers to use his own technology. So, all the effects that ILM did was just George experimenting in public, while people were paying him to do so.
Project Genesis.
You had the first fully computer-generated sequence in Star Trek II.
Fascinating.
Then there was the stained glass knight in Young Sherlock Holmes that was the first fully computer-generated character in a movie.
Itself a window into an as yet unreachable realm of computer-generated effects.
A totally convincing computer-generated lead character.
A concept that Lucas wanted to explore further, this time in his own film.
Oh, Jesus.
Ah, no, not him, but a very different character who also came down from up high.
Howard the Duck.
George hoped that this would be the quack heard round the world.
The plan early on was to make Howard the Duck a fully computer-generated character.
What are you, crazy?
But they realized pretty early that the technology just wasn't there yet.
With CGI of the era not all it was cracked up to be, Howard was forced to suit up like his Ewok predecessors. And the film itself?
It was misconceived and misexecuted.
Howard, you really are the worst.
A humble Lucas stepped back, leaving ILM to resume lending its talents to other people's films.
But he was still watching and waiting the whole time.
Then in 1989, George received the call every child dreads. His mother, Dorothy, had died, and in 1991, George's father also passed away.
We're getting at a good place in their relationship. The parents are very proud. Because, not because the kid is a multi-millionaire, but that their kid had a vision of who they could be, and they not only achieved it, they achieved it wildly. Return of the Jedi, Darth Vader, Luke, that relationship there, you can read that as telling you something about the relationship between George Lucas and his father. It's a commentary on the redemption of fathers and the idea of the younger generation coming to understand what their fathers meant to their children.
I won't leave you.
With Lucas being in a situation where both his parents are gone, you maybe start thinking about things a little bit differently.
But would those things include Star Wars? Well, not yet. George had once revolutionized film. This time he was set to revolutionize something else.
Lucas decides to make this TV series about young Indiana Jones.
For Lucas, it was a return to his childhood where he grew up watching adventure serials on TV. The issue was, some of Lucas's key collaborators were either out of favor
I'm not there.
or unavailable.
George asked me to, and he told me it was going to be a year in Europe and other countries. And I said, I don't want my kids in London at their schools and other places. Family's most important.
Kate Capshaw wasn't the only one screaming. Without Howard by his side, George faced serious issues. It would take a special man to match George's filmmaking style, and so he peered through the looking glass, meeting producer Rick McCallum on the set of Dream Child, a film about the real Alice in Wonderland. George said, "Would you?" And Rick said, "Yes." And they went about assembling a whole new team.
He basically gets this unit of people going to produce this show. A director of photography, David Tattersall, and a production designer, Gavin Bouquet.
Rick proves that he can handle anything.
He's also able to make $1 look like $2.
He's got 2 crews running, one crew shooting while the other crew rests, and they handle producing this giant series of epic scope for television, which we just never seen anything like that before.
But George was just getting started.
The Young Indie Chronicles was more of George doing that same experimentation on somebody else's dime, except this time it was not a film, it was a TV show.
George knew that bringing the magic and scale of Indiana Jones to the small screen would require new tools in the toolbox.
Since George was working with tighter TV budgets, he had to get creative in order to save money.
The idea is they're going to produce it with a lot of digital effects.
They cloned actors to make the crowds look bigger, and they digitally painted the sets to extend them, which is common now, but back then that was unheard of.
There was also a certain filmmaking tool that George had been developing, EditDroid, which was poised to transform the craft of editing forever, bringing him closer and closer to finally attaining his dream of a faster, cheaper, and more digital Lucasfilm.
and he starts to think he can use these technologies if he's going to go back into Star Wars.
But by the early 1990s, it had been almost 10 years since the last installment in the Star Wars franchise.
There was nothing.
And so maybe what was needed was something to remind the fans of what they'd been missing. And maybe to whet their appetite for more.
Lucas decides Star Wars did not have the ongoing, like, expanded universe that Star Trek did, where novels and different adventures and new crews and things. So the idea was, let's maybe start doing a series of novels, to sort of keep Star Wars going.
And kept going. It most definitely did.
They became massive bestsellers.
One book after another.
They said, okay, you're a Star Wars fan, you miss it, here's the next chapter, and it's going to be these novels that are interconnected, that are smart, that have a vision for where these characters go and where the universe is going.
But this is Star Wars, and where this resurgence was going was fairly obvious.
And then came the merchandising campaign.
And there was everything. There was action figures and games and all that stuff like that.
And soon enough, store shelves looked like 1983 all over again.
It sort of created its own little phenomenon that kept Star Wars alive, and that's where you see the real hardcore fandom start to build.
By this stage, it wasn't just a rejuvenated fan base that was building. George's visual effects company was growing into a juggernaut.
ILM is really starting to make advances in digital effects.
And things have come a long way since this sharp-looking fella.
By now, they've done the water weenie from The Abyss and then the liquid metal guy from Terminator. So the computer effects are coming along.
It was ILM's work on one film in particular that would change the course of Star Wars forever.
Once he sees the test footage for Jurassic Park, he's like, let's go. It's time. This is the time. We can do it now.
Fans across the galaxy rejoiced after more than a decade since Return of the Jedi, the Force was back. And it was back for not one, not two, but 3 prequel films. With anticipation at an all-time high, the question remained, what would these films be about?
Well, it's a very good question.
With Return of the Jedi, George Lucas had pushed practical effects to their absolute limit. But having seen this prehistoric future,
watching Jurassic Park and seeing that the effects were going to be convincing was the game changer.
Star Wars was back. And so was an unusually enthusiastic George Lucas, who enthusiastically spent 4 months on the press circuit without picking up a pen.
We're hearing about a brand new trilogy, actually 3 more Star Wars from you. Is that true?
Yeah.
With the fans now whipped into a frenzy, all he had to do was write it.
Today is my first day of writing the new Star Wars series.
George was so sure of the moment's importance, he had it all documented for StarWars.com.
It starts with me sitting here doodling in my little binder, but it ends up with a couple thousand people working together in a very, very intense, emotional, creative way. I mean, it's all over here, it's just a dream. It's just a kind of a thing that I can sit here and do and say, wouldn't it be great if? And then pounding that into reality takes a huge amount of effort.
But Lucas's burden wasn't just creative, it was financial too.
If George was going to self-finance the prequels, he would need a lot of cash, so the pressure was on to create a kid-friendly character like the Ewoks.
While wrestling with that problem, George realized another way to help pay for Phantom was to re-release the original trilogy with a few tweaks.
The Star Wars Trilogy, Special Edition.
These original, beloved masterpieces were getting a top-to-bottom digital makeover.
He was adding material into the films that we'd not seen before, with special effect updates.
But these tantalizing tweaks were more than just a cash cow, or rather a digital dewback. George wanted to prove beyond a shadow of doubt that digital was ready to create not just a smattering of extra creatures, but full-blown, acting, emoting characters.
Jabba the Hutt was inserted into the film for a scene with Han Solo. He and Jabba have almost the exact same conversation that Han just had with Greedo 5 minutes earlier.
Even I get bored sometimes. Do you think I had a choice?
Look, Jabba, even I get bored sometimes. You think I had a choice?
Well, it had been Marsha's choice to cut that scene out in the first place.
George put the Jabba the Hutt scene back in the original Star Wars.
However, the character was originally conceived in a slimmed-down Irish form.
I just can't afford to make exceptions.
I don't know why he does these things, but he does. I'm not there.
And without Marsha's wisdom, he kept doing these things.
For some reason, George Lucas felt it would be necessary for Greedo to shoot at Han Solo before Han Solo shot at him.
I don't know why he changed it. I have no idea.
That was a big change, and it really roiled fandom.
All these seemingly unnecessary tweaks did have some fans nervous as the new films approached. However, not enough to stop the special editions from becoming a staggering success, hauling in over $200 million at the box office. This was the nest egg Lucas needed to self-finance the prequels. But the question remained, who would direct these movies? Because the last time George directed...
George actually became so stressed out that he ended up in the hospital.
So, with near limitless cash, George went straight to Hollywood's A-list directors, Robert Zemeckis, Steven Spielberg, and Ron Howard. All three declined and encouraged George to take the helm.
He's staying away because the directing experience has been so bad for him.
With the bad experience in his past, what or who could possibly convince George to have another go at directing?
Rick McCallum, who produces the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, there's not going to be any crew problems, because if there is, Rick is just going to remove the problem.
This is what makes George Lucas comfortable with the idea of directing again, because he sees Rick McCallum is this bulldog who will solve any production problem.
With independent financing now in place, George Lucas would make his feature film directorial return.
He really felt, well, this is another experiment. This is an experimental process. We're going to be moving to digital. I need to be there. And since I'm going to be there, I may as well direct it.
Production gears up at Skywalker Ranch. Everyone is really excited. The energy is high.
It was time to start assembling his team.
Lucas likes working with people he's comfortable with. He likes working with his collaborators. So Lucas bringing the team from Young Indiana Jones to work with on the prequels is very much par for the course on how Lucas works.
However, the consequences of moving into the digital realm were already beginning to be felt. Many of the practical effects artists and model makers from the original trilogy would not be part of George's new vision.
But that all stuff was going to be done digital, so there was no discussion about that.
Legendary designer Ralph McQuarrie would also be missing.
By that time, he was no longer working as a production illustrator. George had to find someone new who could fill those shoes, and that was Doug Chiang. Doug Chiang admired the work of Ralph McQuarrie, aspired to that kind of work, and had that kind of creative vision sensibility.
While drawing inspiration from McQuarrie's original work, the prequels were to have a different look and design to them.
The sort of filthiness, the dirtiness of the original trilogy was a representation of how the Empire had let the galaxy fall apart.
Phantom Menace provides us a look at the great before time.
So this is the height of civilization right now. This is pre-fascism, so it's the 1930s before the Nazis.
This was the time when civilization was enlightened.
George was going new technology, new crew, and a new prequel. But would he remember about the heart of the film, something his ex-editor, Marsha, dedicated herself to?
There was not one single scene of any real emotional, dramatic substance that didn't go through her hands.
I think movies and film are about storytelling. With George, it was special effects.
Together, George and Marsha had made magic. But would George be able to continue that success without her? With his team of core collaborators assembled, George continued to battle away with drafts of the Phantom Menace script. Importantly, his vision for a kid-friendly, and therefore toy-friendly, character in the film was coming together. His name would be Jar Jar Binks, and George had big plans for him.
He wanted it to be the first digital co-star.
George really believed in the character from the beginning.
The concept of Jar Jar Binks, it's a great idea. Kid-friendly, trickster, character, funny, that kind of thing.
I think Lucas thought he'd created like the next big iconic character in Star Wars.
George's character designers also believed he'd hit a home run. and excitedly came up with illustrations of what this new superstar character might look like. They finally settled on this floppy-eared amphibian. With Jar Jar on his way to superstardom, George shifted his attention to casting, and he was facing a problem he hadn't dealt with before, choosing younger versions of his iconic characters.
I'm getting too old for this sort of thing.
For the role of Obi-Wan Kenobi, they considered Tim Roth and Kenneth Branagh.
But there was another up-and-coming performer, Scottish actor Ewan McGregor.
It was train spotting that really impressed them with Ewan McGregor's acting chops. I mean, he even had the accent when he came into audition.
You were right about one thing, Master. The negotiations were short.
That's good.
George was also on the hunt to find the perfect Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi's mentor.
They considered the character being 60 years old, and they also envisioned this character having a mohawk. They considered Denzel Washington, Kurt Russell, and Morgan Freeman.
After carefully considering which middle-aged man would look good with a mohawk,
They finally did decide to cast Liam Neeson, who obviously is much younger than 60 years old, so they changed the character.
George was also looking for a young Anakin Skywalker. Just how young was the question.
Casting a 12-year-old wouldn't have the same pull in your heartstrings effect as casting an 8-year-old would have.
Jake Lloyd nabbed the role after a killer screen test, beating off hundreds of other potential Sith Lords. But his co-star and later love interest, Natalie Portman, was the only leading lady on George's mind.
Natalie Portman had done The Professional before this, I think in 1994, and was fantastic in that. So she was a great choice to be Amidala.
Rounding out the list of new arrivals was Samuel Jackson playing Mace Windu,
Sam Jackson's the baddest mother in the galaxy.
and stuntman Ray Park, who would play Darth Maul.
Originally, that part is cast with Benicio del Toro, and Benicio del Toro leaves when the character eventually doesn't have any dialogue.
But George Lucas always planned to include some characters from the original trilogy. And nobody knows that better than Ian McDiarmid.
When I first met George, he said, "Hey, great nose."
But George planned to make use of more than just Ian's nose this time around.
So when I got the script, I found that I was playing a senator. And he seemed like a straightforward, reasonable guy. And finally, people are able to see my face.
Yes and no.
So there's this other guy, Darth Sidious, who's working behind the scenes, working against the regime and against the Queen. Very mysterious. And I thought, oh God, that's the part, isn't it? Wish I was playing that. I got the first call sheet and I saw my name or number opposite Darth Sidious. So I got hyper excited. I was this apparently innocuous, perfectly straightforward politician. And really, I was this, murderous devil working his evil charm.
Anthony Daniels, returning as C-3PO, would also be in for a shock.
George Lucas, he says, your character is made by Anakin. A few days later, I clicked. Anakin turns into Darth Vader. Darth Vader has made my character 3PO.
Oops.
I was genuinely shocked and surprised.
Of course I'm worried, and you should be too.
C-3PO wasn't the only droid fans would be looking for. Surely R2-D2's Kenny Baker would be excited to return with his old pal.
Kenny always said, Anthony never liked me, I don't know why. Anthony came from theatre. He regarded himself as a thespian, as an actor. Kenny was inside this kind of metal egg, just trying to make it work. So there was no actorially connection between the two of them.
Wake up! Wake up!
And he used to say, he doesn't respond, I'm talking to him and everything, but that was part of he doesn't talk, he beeps.
Possibly the biggest casting decision of all was that of Jar Jar Binks.
He was going to be an all-digital character.
It wasn't as straightforward as just creating him in a computer.
The difficult thing is trying to create a character from a wireframe model that feels like a human, is dignified as a human, that has the same emotional impact as a human character.
George needed to find an actor who could portray the elastic characteristics of Jar Jar. Then, using motion capture technology and visual effects, he would combine the performance with Jar Jar's digital image to complete the character. Interest in playing the role came from an unusual source.
Michael Jackson actually wanted to play Jar Jar himself, but he wanted to do it in full prosthetics, and George wanted a full digital character. So the part went to Broadway performer Ahmed Best.
Casting director Robin Gerlin went to see a performance of Stomp, and that's where she sees Ahmed Best, and she thinks, there's our Jar Jar Binks.
I hired Ahmed because he is very physical and he can act with his body.
George had found his creature, and soon there would be a new fan favorite in the universe. Or so he hoped.
I know this is gonna work. I know it's gonna work. Jar Jar is a key to all this. Hopefully it'll work.
It's 1997, 3 years since the announcement of Episode 1.
Production gears up at Skywalker Ranch. The stars are now involved.
I'm Jake, and I'm playing Anakin Skywalker.
The designs have been made, energy's high.
But with a new cast, George was yearning for some old crew to rejoin the gang to help bring his vision to life. Roger Christian, who had worked on A New Hope, was at the top of his list. The problem was, Roger had moved on from his days as a set decorator and was now forging a career as a director in his own right.
We had a chat, said, who's doing second unit, you know, because I love Star Wars and I love doing this. And he said, oh, we don't need it on this one. We you know, George is shooting. So I said, well, just put my name down.
2 weeks later, Roger received a phone call.
I got a call from Rick McCallum and he said, George has only got 12 weeks to shoot this whole movie. There is a lot more than we thought. So can you start? Would you do it? And I said, yeah, I've just got to go back to Vancouver. I'll do this mix. And then they said, no, Roger, you have to start now. We'll give you 5 minutes. We're going to leave the room. Make a decision.
So Roger promptly agreed and got to work. But George was dealing with more than just a tight schedule. Locations were also proving a headache. With much of the film to be shot in Tunisia, George was hoping to reuse his old locations from A New Hope. But there was a problem. No one remembered where they were.
Back in those days, it was nobody's job to archive wilderness locations.
He just was like beside himself that no one knew where we shot.
It seems George didn't realize that several years earlier, a young archaeologist named David West Reynolds had contacted Lucasfilm about finding the lost locations. Lucasfilm's response had been something like, we're not sure. Turn left at Algeria.
It was a spectacular success, and I published the story just because I wanted to share it.
Unfortunately, no one at Lucasfilm had read it. Eventually, the article found its way onto Rick McCallum's desk, and he said,
get him on the phone. And they flew David to Tunis. He identified every single location.
With a tight shooting schedule and a self-funded budget, it was a break George desperately needed.
Rick picks up a fiberglass ring in the Mos Eisley Plaza and says, look, it's some unidentifiable piece of Mos Eisley Plaza. And I said, that's not unidentifiable, Rick, that's a dewback tether ring.
David was duly rewarded for his efforts.
He wanted me to come back to Skywalker Ranch, and this eventually becomes an offer.
An offer to become an archivist at Lucasfilm.
Up until they hired me at Lucasfilm, the policy was never hire fans. I was the first exception to that.
However, 20 years later, Medanine had come a long way, which was great for Medanine, but not so great for the crew.
There's dense development all around it. We wouldn't have angles where you wouldn't see the modern world, but we went up on some roofs, we looked around. There was a section of this that if it was fully dressed, we'd get enough angles to make that location worth it. So Xar Medanine ends up being the location for where Anakin parts from his mother, and you see all of the doorways.
All right, we're gonna get that shot ready now.
But they'd also be shooting, once again, in a British film studio. And in June of 1997, filming of The Phantom Menace began.
And action!
This is the first major digital effects film from Lucas.
Rick McCallum said there is more blue screen than any film in the history of cinema.
For the actors, this new way of movie making was going to take some getting used to.
George would say, which was a little disconcerting, we won't divide it into close-ups and mid-shots and long shots. We'll do them all at once, because these cameras can do that. So we knew we had to have absolute concentration.
You're asking an awful lot of your actors. You have to imagine what's chasing you. You have to imagine what the weather is like. You have to imagine what you're seeing out the window.
But George had a whole other list of priorities.
I think George Lucas believed I will be able to control everything, performance, light, everything will be exactly as I want it.
That's always been Lucas's ambition, is to let the filmmaker control everything that's on the screen.
But while shooting digitally gave George creative freedom, it wouldn't always be a cinematic silver bullet, especially when dealing with the stature of a man like Liam Neeson.
Liam Neeson is 6 foot 4 inches tall, and so it cost them an additional $150,000 because they had to build the sets up to his full height.
With only 12 weeks to shoot the film, it was an issue Lucas could ill afford. And the problems kept coming.
I looked at their R2-D2 and now it was full of equipment. Now these worked, the radio control. And I said, have you had Kenny in this? And they said, no. And I said, get him down. So I called him down to the set and he couldn't get in it. I said, I told you he couldn't. And then we had to try to make it work to get him in it.
It became harder and harder for the original trilogy alumni to watch Lucasfilm 2.0 learn on the job.
Frank Oz and his crew performing Yoda. It's a new puppet. The original was latex, but now it's cast in silicone, which is much heavier. So Frank Oz is performing Yoda underneath the stage. All the stage rostrums are all elevated, but it's really heavy on his arm. And it's a huge physical effort for him to hold this up and try and do a performance that's delicate and nuanced through his hands. And right in the middle of Yoda saying, concerned I am, I wonder what this, God damn, this is so heavy. And Yoda would disappear down the hole. And Frank was so frustrated with the new puppet.
Though no one could deny George's pioneering filmmaking methods were the future, would they come at a personal cost?
My first day, we got over to the set, and there is somebody wearing 3PO, and it's not me.
After creating C-3PO's distinctive walk, Anthony Daniels had been moved aside for a puppeteer.
What are you talking about? Of course, ultimately I go back in and I put the voice on somebody else's work. They didn't care about how I would feel about that. I just said to George, he kind of was walking in a weird way. Just being built by a little boy, what do you expect?
It's 1997. Filming of The Phantom Menace is in full swing. But George's transition to digital filmmaking is creating a rocky road for members of the cast. Well, not everyone.
Okay, everyone, let's start with a brief warm-up. Ahmed Best. You hear stories from the set, people like, he is hysterical. He's going to be the next breakthrough character in Star Wars.
Liam Neeson even called his agent to tell him he was working with the next Eddie Murphy.
It was George's baby. He wrote it the way he wanted, and he directed it the way he wanted.
He was happy. George really felt the character of Jar Jar Binks was fantastic.
While the hype around Jar Jar was building on set, there was also a building going on set.
When we were on set, they weren't just constructing the next set around the corner, they were building the studio. There was a guided missile had suddenly hit the building every 5 minutes. It was insane.
But once filming started in Tunisia, they'd come across a drama that almost put a nail in the production's coffin.
We just got these storms and it completely destroyed the entire camp.
Wiped them out, all of them.
Pods were smashed. The costume department, makeup, everything was in the mud. I remember somebody saying, "Oh, I've got Liam's beard here, look," and they were putting water on it. It was down to that. Rick just got everybody going. Rick is fantastic.
Was he, though? While there's no doubt Rick was a wonderful producer for George, he was not universally loved by cast and crew.
A lot of people don't like him. I have no idea what the problem is, but I know that. And people close to George have told me that.
Helga Zangen, just adorable. And then Rick McCullum.
He's not someone who runs politely with things that he didn't agree with.
But as the saying goes, to make an omelette, you've got to break a few eggs. And on this shoot, Rick was the head chef. But relationships weren't the only things heating up. Temperatures in the desert were soaring.
It was so hot, we fried an egg on R2-D2's head. And in August, the Tunisians themselves locally call it Suicide Week. It was unbearable, the heat, but we didn't have a choice. He wanted Natalie Portman, and that was the only window she had.
She was going to school, I think, full-time during the making of the films, just really, really working hard, was exhausted a lot of times.
And to make a bad situation even worse, the crew still had to shoot the epic pod race scene.
So there's these stands with Tunisians all dressed up in rubber heads and helmets. They had somebody doing what they had to do and then cut to get the helmets off because they would have died in this heat.
With the Tunisia shoot about to wrap, Roger Christian could look forward to a well-deserved break. However, Lucas had just one more tiny request for his fatigued second unit director.
George then said, "You'll have to carry the last 10 days of the shoot. I have to go back to the ranch. We're under such pressure. This is the most complex film we've ever handled special effects-wise."
And just like that, George flew home and left Roger to direct the rest of the movie.
His imagination is really working overtime.
Well, for VFX supervisor John Knoll, that was a problem.
John said, this special effects-wise, there's 3,200 shots.
Every shot had a digital effect. And the digital effect may have been just having you shake your head or move you to the other side.
And George's attention to detail wouldn't end there.
I know the film was shot. A lot of it was shot in 1997. The film didn't come out till 1999. There was a lot of reworking and reshooting.
But George did have an ally. His legendary sound effects creator and now editor, Ben Burt. The experience of cutting young indie digitally was paying off big time.
This is cyber directing, right? Yeah. Well, 3D editing. Yeah.
George's galaxy was coming back to life. Throughout 1997 and into 1998, work continued on the blockbuster. Lucasfilm's archivist/archaeologist now has a new job to perform, crafting Phantom's trailer.
We're very aware of all the expectations that are resting on this little piece of film because it's going to set the emotion that we're going to bring to the release of the film. So much depends on the reaction to this trailer.
But while making the trailer, David had come to a devastating conclusion about the film.
It's not exactly what I was looking for.
He had a huge decision to make.
Are we going to make a trailer that reflects what this movie really is?
Are you brainless?
Are we going to make the trailer for the movie that we wish this was? We went with, let's create the trailer that we're thrilled to see before you find out what you're really going to get.
In November of 1998, the Phantom Menace teaser premiered to great fanfare.
They had lines outside the theater to get in to see movies that would never have had lines to get in to see it.
Anticipation was that high.
The question was, would fans see through David's own visual effect?
You know, I think one of the first shots when you start to see these things and we don't know what they are emerging from the mist, and you hear the music, and my God, if that didn't get you, nothing would.
People really responded well to that trailer.
People are going to the theater, buying tickets, going in, watching the trailer.
And then come back for the second screening of that movie just so they could watch the trailer again.
We always felt misgivings. I just hope that people would forgive us for that eventually because it was a sincere gesture. We were trying to show them that somebody here knows what you wanted.
David's misgivings over the quality of the film initially appeared to be misplaced.
It was well received in those early screenings.
This gave George the confidence to use Jar Jar as a major promotional tool.
They thought Jar Jar Binks was going to be this massive smash success character.
Those who have seen the private screenings of this film in advance say the effects are stunning.
But Lucas was, at heart, a storyteller. And if the effects didn't tell a story, it would all be for nothing.
George always said to me, the important thing is story, characters, sets, so you know where you're at, but visual effects only when you need them.
The only important answer to that question would come from the fans.
1 week from today, Star Wars fans will get their first glimpse at George Lucas's prequel,
The Phantom Menace, hitting theaters near you.
Fan appetites proved insatiable.
It's Star Wars, you know?
Waiting 20 years.
It's time to get back into it.
there's no way it's going to be a disappointment.
On May the 19th, 1999, the Phantom Menace premiered, marking an end to Star Wars' Dark Age.
Are there any of you that think this is going to be a lousy movie?
Unfortunately, the immediate reaction was one of...
When is it gonna get there? I was sitting there and I'm thinking, when is that feeling of Star Wars gonna come back? You get to about an hour or so into it, and that's when it hits you like a ton of bricks. It's not gonna happen.
I want to bag the movie, but I really didn't think I cared about the characters.
I'm not too big on the acting.
I think I deserve a public apology from George Lucas.
People who saw the film as young people, children, have now grown up. They're looking at this with nostalgic expectations through the eyes of a child's memory.
I'm not sure this
And it wasn't just the old school fans that felt let down.
It wasn't to my taste. Absolutely not. I actually left during the credits. I was so shocked.
After I saw the movie, I went out and I sat in my car and I cried because I was so sad.
He had told me that his vision for the prequels were going to be much more like The Godfather, and dark and moody and more cloak and dagger-ish. I'm like, oh, that could be really cool. Anyhow, didn't quite turn out that way.
I thought the movie was racist. I mean, there were Chinese men.
You think she suspects an attack?
There were, what was he supposed to be, Jewish, I think?
I'm a Toydarian. My trick's gonna work, gonna make all the money.
George was upset by the accusations, particularly of racism against him, because if George, anyone isn't racist, it's George.
There's a little bit of regret there. If I was there, I know the prequels would have been better. And I think part of that problem is that he had yes men around him.
While the film came in for some heavy criticism, it was nothing compared to the backlash one character received.
Mr. called Jar Jar Binks. Mr. Your humble servant.
The reaction to Jar Jar, I think Lucas was genuinely surprised. I think Ahmed Best, gets a bum rap.
In terms of doing what was asked of him, he was great.
Just the character is not particularly well conceived.
The thing was, George was looking at the bigger picture. There was a whole new generation in front of him, ready to be swept up into the Star Wars universe. And their reaction was...
There was a lot more action in it than in all the others, and that's why I liked it more.
I asked my son, he was 6, and he said he loved Jar Jar Binks.
A lot of action, a lot of noise. It was cool.
Well, I've got 2 girls. Jar Jar Binks came on. He was their favorite character.
What's your favorite character? Jar Jar Binks.
George's creative decisions had been vindicated by his legions of new fans and by the box office. The film made over $900 million during its initial run.
Here's the kicker. You wait, 20 years later? Suddenly people who were 10 at the time are now 30. Favorite film. Absolutely adored it.
Maybe it was really smart to make a Star Wars movie made for that new generation.
George had made yet another massively successful chapter in the Star Wars saga. Once again, he'd done it outside of the Hollywood system and on his own terms.
And action!
All while pushing filmmaking technology ahead by decades and paving the way for blockbusters to come. But what about the fans, who'd been there from the beginning? Could he afford to leave them in the past?
There was a lot of pressure on George to somehow make Episode 2 more likable.
Lucas had committed himself to financing 2 more films, and there was no guarantee audiences would return for more. George had a decision to make. Should he listen to his critics and respond accordingly?
The human element and the story got pushed out of the frame.
Or look inward and follow his heart? With his father's words echoing in his head.
Control your own fate. Make your own financial decisions.
He knew the choice he had made could decide the future of the entire franchise.
This party's over.